All right. Hello and welcome everybody to the Game Dev show. I guess this will be the second one of the day since we just wrapped one up a second ago, our own little show. So as Dave thought we were live earlier, we started. I'm hitting all kinds of wrong buttons here, everybody. So hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us live. We've got a lot to talk about today. We're just kind of discussing a little bit of that right before we got started, and we've got a couple things to give away. We did a giveaway last week, and if you didn't get your prize yet, please email me again. I think there were a few people who I didn't get their email in time, and I want to make sure that everybody gets their stuff. So please send me those. So welcome, and hey guys, how's it going?
Hi.
Hello.
Jason.
It's going great.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. I thought we weren't going to have any topics, but I think we've got like a dozen or so now, just after talking for a minute. Anywhere you guys want to get started, or should we just continue on with quest systems with Andrew's topic?
Yeah, we can start off with that.
Quest system. So you're working on a new quest system, right, Andrew?
Yeah.
Kind of where that came from?
It's a quest system for the game modules bundle, which is already live. I can get a link to it in a second. But it's already live. It's going to be added to that. But essentially, the game modules is, technically made to make it easier to do more complex systems that run semi-autonomously in the background. The quest system is a big one because a lot of people need quests, whether they're quests to go kill the dragon or kill a bunch of goblins or to rescue a princess from a spaceship on a lost planet, or they're just like, hey, I need to track something, and when you've hit a certain amount, automatically do something else. And so I'm building this quest system, and man, it's turned out to be much more complicated than I thought. I actually started working on it a few months ago. I got sidetracked with the day job and all that, but this week I've got the week off, so I've been doing a lot of more fun work. Nice. But even at the beginning of the quest system, that's I added a blackboard system to the game modules because as I was building the quest, I was like, well, I need blackboard for this. There's no world in which I can't. Oh, thank you, Johnny. No need. I need to use blackboard, so it's become a very complicated system, but it's also going to be very exciting because it's going to allow you to do all sorts of different quests that will be very flexible and yet easy to use and semi-automated, as I said, so that things just happen. Once you set it up, things can just happen in the background and you don't really have to think about it.
So there's a question, a follow-up one on that. I think maybe for the people that don't know anything about your game module stuff, I know the answer to this, but they're asking if the quest system is hardwired to like the specific character attributes or if it can work towards different types of games. I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about that and then just dive into why quest systems are interesting and difficult?
Yeah. So the premise of the game modules itself, I started creating it because I wanted to make an RPG, and the RPG toolkits out there were the type that were what's the term? They force you to do things a certain way. Opinionated. So if you didn't want to make that kind of RPG, then you'd have to do a lot of work modifying the system in order to make it work for you. And so I thought to myself, well, hell, we could probably have a system that doesn't care what kind of game you're making, that doesn't care any about that, or doesn't even care if you use some of the system. You can use some of it and not other parts. So the answer to the question, it can handle any type of game. It does not matter. I need to find some time to make like a tower defense game, to make all sorts of different demos using it so that people can see all the sorts of different games you can make with it, because you can really use it for anything you want. It's flexible. That being said, the flexibility also adds a layer of complexity or at least vagueness to it, where, an RPG or a sci-fi system, you can see, oh, well, that's clearly sci-fi. That's, you plug in some values and you're done. Where this one, you do have to do some, yeah, exactly. You do have to do some coding on your own. It's not a huge amount. I think a brand new beginner could use it for a learning tool, because you do have to learn some coding, intermediate level, I would say, to operate it. And then the character attributes, there's a whole module called stats. That was actually the first module that you can create any kind of attributes. You can use it for stats or skills. These are things that can be tracked through the game. There are things that can be upgraded through the game. There are things that can be leveled up through the game. They can be influenced by other objects. There's the conditions module. So you can have a condition like heroism that automatically increases one of your stats. And when it automatically disappears from the list, it decreases that stat accordingly. It's got all sorts of systems that tie in together so that once you press play, these systems kind of operate on themselves. They'll send now with the quest system. We now have events and notes being added to a blackboard. That's going to be automated as well, so that in the end,
As a side note, you should probably explain what Blackboard is to the audience.
That's so exciting when I learned about it.
Sidetracking.
I know. It was very exciting when I learned about it because it was something so obvious to me, yet after years and years of doing this, I had never really heard about. Essentially, and you guys can correct me if I misspeak a little bit, but essentially is a class that holds data that is living by itself. You know, imagine a blackboard on the wall, and you can write stuff on that blackboard. You can write like, hey, gold 500. And then you can say, oh, no, gold 510. Now, any other object can look at the blackboard and say, oh, there's 510 gold, not caring where that gold value comes from. They don't need a connection to the class that holds the gold. They don't need to connect all these other classes together. So it's, in my mind, one of the benefits is it's a lot easier to share data between classes without having to worry about connecting all those classes together, which is just more convenient. It also has the benefit of being able to send out events. So whenever a note is updated, you can optionally send out an event, and things that are listening to the blackboard, they don't even have to be watching it all the time. They can just hear, oh, the blackboard got updated. Oh yeah, I care about that. Let me do something with it. And then so that's a huge benefit too. There's probably more. What did I miss on the blackboards?
You actually described it pretty well. Specifically, it's a tracker for information, and everybody wants information. So having a single point to refer to, where everybody can just dump their information in, and everybody can look at that and make decisions, is pretty common practice in other situations, not just quests. For example, in AI, you can construct a creature's mind and things that it tracks, and then whatever decisions it wants to make, it can check what actually happened there. For example, if a chicken gets scared, then it knows to start running, and it can know to stay scared based on the last time something got near it. So there is a tracker for something got near, and then something can look at that last time something was near me. It can be used in many situations.
Yeah, and it's another example of some of the most powerful concepts in programming come from the simplest ideas. For example, the command pattern is probably the most powerful / simplest pattern in all of programming. But a similar example would be something like this. At its core, this is another implementation of what's called the mediator. There's loads of them. I mean, event systems are mediators too, to some degree. But the general takeaway is the world is full of complex information, and at any point, for every new thing you have to care about, you exponentially have to increase the amount of connections in your system. So if you have the equivalent of a phone, and you have to have a phone number for every person that's going to your birthday party, you have to manage that yourself. But if you post a notice somewhere of a party event, anybody who's available to see that notice can access to it. But likewise, you can have information shared that then can be propagated to everybody else, right? That's why people tend to have shared WhatsApp groups or whatever for events, because then everyone can have a localized series of events. So the takeaway is, when you've got something as complex as a game where you have to have quests which are conditional based on infinite numbers of things, you have a really hard time tracking the individual minutiae of stuff. And so what a lot of games will do, this is for, as Yuri said, for AI, but it also applies to so many other scenarios where there's any kind of global state. You tend to stick with something very simplistic, like a flag system. So has or has not picked up the item, what was the furthest room in the dungeon you've gone to, how many coins you have in your wallet. And that means when the time comes to make logistical decisions later, the dialogue choices of the NPCs in the game can specifically say, if they have this in their wallet, and they've seen this, and you've talked to me before, about this topic, then do this bit of dialogue. So traditionally, you have two parts. You have the global blackboard, which would be the game state as it's relevant to everything. And then you can have a blackboard that's a localized version for the NPCs or for the town or whatever you want to do. And that gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility for controlling more complex narratives.
And to expand on the idea of global blackboards, one thing that is extremely common usage with a global blackboard is achievements in games. Because once you started the game, those achievements will keep on tracking forever, regardless of which save you're on, etc., etc. Usually, it may have a blackboard that's per game save, so it saves and loads with the player, but the flags, the things you have done that everybody can see, live on whatever service you're playing the game on, like Steam or PlayStation trophies, whatever have it.
Yeah.
So did you code the whole blackboard system yourself then, or you
I had some help from a friend from Ireland at the time, I'm pretty sure. His name is Jason Story. He's a nice guy. But yeah, essentially, it really is a pretty straightforward system. But Jason helped me out with a couple of what's the I'm forgetting the term, but the T symbol.
The syntactic sugar? Oh no, yeah. Oh, generics. Sorry.
Generics.
Yeah,
I thought it was
right.
generics, but I was like, nah, that's all right. Yeah. So you helped me out with some generics and about the concept of sending the events, which I obviously have seen events with just Unity because Unity has events built in. But the idea of how to build one of those systems, I didn't know. It's not complicated, it turns out, but it's just something that I need a direction, and Jason pushed me in the right direction, and I was able to complete that. And also with he taught me about a different kind of list. I think it was called a stack, where things go in the top and come out the bottom, or you can flip it around, first in, first out type of thing. And that was an interesting concept too, which Jason, you could probably go in a little bit more detail about. But if people don't know about it, it's actually quite handy. In this system for the events, I basically want to fire off one event every frame, but I don't want to fire off 1,000 events every frame. So it just says, hey, if there's an event to fire it. And then it pulls it from the list. And then the next frame, if there's one, fire it, pulls it from the list. And when you add it, it just goes up here. When you pull it, it comes out here and just perfect.
Yeah, it is worth noting too that so yeah, if you've come from a classically trained programming background, stacks, queues, and linked lists and all the other various combinations tend to kind of come part and parcel when you're learning it. But what's interesting is just because you know the path, just because you know the collection, doesn't mean you think about clever ways to use it. So without getting into the whole concept of log and how the which collection is better for which use case, the important thing I would say is that there are different collections do different things, but the general goal of a collection is that you put stuff in it and then you engage with that information somehow, and different actions have different costs and benefits. So some things are for long-term storage, some things are for reading only, some things are for inserting into the middle, some things are for taking things out of and resizing or reshaping, some things are for sorting. And different types of collections will have different costs for each of these. Some take a long time, some take a short time. And ideally, you want to pick the right collection for the right job you're doing. Sometimes, depending on the context, you might even be worth having two lists, or well, not lists, but two types of collections. One that's really good for instant lookup, very efficient, and one that's really good for long-term storage for iteration or for whatever else you're doing. All of this is to say, one of the most common examples of things that are queued up are queues, and stacked together are stacks, right? And so those two specifically handle the FIFO and LIFO, or first in and last in or out. So the idea would be stack of plates is a good visual metaphor. Literally, if you put something in it, you have to take the top one off without a lot of mess, right? So you end up going top one down, top one up. That's that stack of plates. And a queue would be like queuing up to do something. You traditionally deal with the person who was there earlier rather than the one that just arrived later. All of this is to say, a lot of people will use a queue for doing some kind of chore or job, but what's really fascinating is it's really good for decoupling the addition of information from the use of that information. What I mean by that is it's often used in asynchronous workflows or similar, where there is a queue of things to be done. So a good example of this would be, imagine you had an RTS and you have a bunch of different characters, or you've got your farmers and you've got your builders and whatever. Now you could give each one a task individually and then have to manage that, or you could broadcast an event that says somebody go cut down this tree. But now all of them are going to run to cut down the tree. That's not what you want. You want somebody to take the job and do it, and everyone else to wait, right? You don't need one job per person. So what you do is, rather than assigning a job or dealing with mess, you create some kind of stack or queue of existing jobs, depending on what you're looking for, and then you just add them to the queue. And then each of the guys can look and do an iteration and go, oh, is there one available? Pluck it from the collection. Nobody else gets to see it, and I get to deal with the job. So in Andrew's example, if you're doing events and you don't want to dispatch them broadly to everybody else, but you want to have it handled by something, that's a common pattern, is where you add all the new information as they come in. That way you don't have to panic and freeze the entire application when 50 things come in at once. You just let the 50 things build up, and then on your own pace, you just tick through and clean up what's been built up. As a final note on that, the classic visual metaphor for that is an office where you've got stacks of paper to process coming in, and rather than having to stop everything and process the papers, just keep adding papers to the inbox, which is where the term comes from, and then you move them to the outbox as you do it, right? So the idea would be tasks come in, tasks go out, and so the person doing this job is not beholden to the same rules as the events of constant firing in from different sources. And you can add new sources without freezing the person's job that they're doing the processing, which is perfect for a quest system where you're receiving lots of hypothetical inputs of different events that are not going to freeze your workflow of everything else.
Yeah, another use case is analytics. You see a lot of people that they get loads of analytics at once and suddenly they just pump them all out at the same time. And if your network's down, also having analytics in a queue is better, because then your analytics are going back out in the order that they came in. So if somebody's reading through the analytics and they're doing a learning management system or something like that, they're actually ordered. One point on the blackboard system is I like to abstract it and then use different blackboards for different areas, because I find that sometimes people use one single blackboard for everything and suddenly they've got friggin' listeners getting called all over the place because they're all going, oh,
yeah,
was it
a thousand objects for one
me.
event. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Then suddenly everything's listening to the same blackboard and you've got 1,000 things going, oh, was it me? Oh, I'll just check, is that something I want to look at? And then they're doing the checks. So having one for AI, one for quests, one for analytics, or whatever, is good to break them up and separate them out, because it makes your system a lot more efficient and optimized.
Which brings to a good point too, is the whole point of encapsulation and using the abstraction layers is you can do that a layer deeper. So you could start with a global watcher thing that does everything. And then inside of that, you can make subboards, and the subboards are in a dictionary, and the dictionary does a key value against the type. And then you can suddenly, and you can keep branching out as needed to. There's a great example of this with Azure and AWS do their own versions at scale for like asynchronous stuff. The concept of that's usually called topics. So you, rather than subscribing to an event single blackboard concept, you subscribe to a topic, and a topic is dispatched from a board into subboards, and then other people subscribe to those. So yeah, I very much recommend the same thing.
And interfaces are your friend as well to learn for these sort of things as well, because a lot of people actually use classes and then they've got all these abstraction layers of, oh, if it's this class, this class, this class. Learn about interfaces and start using those in that circumstance as well. It'll save you a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, and on top of that, if you are doing any type of quest system, consider what information you need ahead of time to start counting and what information can be only beginning to be looked for as the quest begins. Because if you are playing a game and say there are 10,000 enemies that can spawn and the player can start killing them at any given point in time, but later on in development you decide, hey, I want to add a quest, kill all 10,000 enemies, you need to start tracking that before you actually add the quest. You can add trackers without any usage, and just when you need them in development later on, you can add something that displays that tracker, such as the quest. And if you have a quest that should only start counting once it's picked up, give it its own blackboard, or give it a counter that will only start counting once the condition of having picked up the quest is given. There is a lot to go on there, but with the 10 years of Terraria, we've learned that there is a lot of information we want to gather, even if nobody sees it.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan at the end of a game, or even in the middle of a game, of seeing stats. So, one of my favorite things about Civilization games is at the end seeing all the charts and the graphs. And, one of the things I've been thinking about making a demo of on that exact topic is damage per minute. Like if we do like a tower defense game, maybe you really want to know how much damage you're doing per minute and then see a chart. So I could use basically a blackboard and maybe some of these systems for some method I haven't quite figured out yet to track how much damage you do at any given time, and then make a chart that says how much damage you did. Or hey, global, how many enemies have you killed while playing this game through all your game saves. So you've got the application has its own tracker system using probably a blackboard or something similar. And then I've killed 50,000 goblins. Wow. That's a lot of goblins I've killed. I love that stuff.
I just got around to finishing, playing and finishing Frostpunk. Frostpunk? That's the one, isn't it? The
Yeah.
steampunk sort of world. And at the end, when you finish that, it plays back how you built your city. So it plays it back from a top-down view and then gives you all these sort of stats, but in verbiage. So it's like you managed to save the seed storage, but you decided to kill off this entire town because you wouldn't help them. And it gives you that back in the story at the end, and it's a stats, but in a verbiage way. And then it gives you some little stats about your city was this big when you finished. You saved these many people. Nice. I love that stuff.
That's really nice. Yeah, and to go back to Andrew's point about using achievement stuff as well, what's really nice about having some system like that is, I mentioned in a previous one of these shows, we talked about the problem I have with audio and why I recommend FMOD is because it's a cross-cutting concern and you end up having to hack stuff in at different places. It gets messy. Well, similarly with achievements, if you want achievements, you probably want achievements based on arbitrary things. And the worst thing you can do is tie your creative ideas up. Wouldn't it be fun to have an achievement where you've killed 6 of these guys while wearing a top hat, but then have to go, where do I have to put in 5 lines of ridiculous code to figure this out? Using a blackboard system, if it has an event off the end of that, where it's like on new event received and a way of perusing the totals, all you have to do is say on blackboard updated, check status, and then if, inventory hat is whatever, and kills is greater than this amount, and types or whatever. That basically means that the idea of adding creative achievements doesn't litter your code, and it allows you to have the creativity completely separate, right? So those kinds of patterns are really useful for avoiding cross-cutting concerns.
And there's something I want to bring up that we haven't addressed yet, but earlier was asked in the chat whether blackboards retain their information for game sessions, which is entirely disconnected from the concept of having a blackboard, but it contains information. You can decide to save that information anyway. You can duplicate that information anyway. You can load that information anyway. So if you know how to save and load games, you know how to save and load blackboards. And if you want to have that on a cloud or on a service such as Steam, the achievements or the trophies on PlayStation, you can. It's just information.
So, Jason, you'd mentioned FMOD earlier when we were talking. I don't know if you mentioned this on stream at all, but somebody asked a question. I thought it was kind of perfect to pop up for you. They're saying FMOD's good, but have you considered using, and I don't even know how you pronounce the Y's one. I don't know why there's 2 W's, because it's more easier to use and more expansive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And about FMOD too, just again, I don't know if we were I think we were talking about this off stream beforehand. So
yeah, it could have been. I guess the short answer is there's a general concept of you can either do something in engine or you can use middleware, something else which does it for you and you interact with that and it handles the job. There's lots of middleware for games across the board. There's middleware for dealing with dialogue. There's middleware for dealing with your localization. There's all sorts of stuff. Audio is a big one. Audio is another cross-cutting concern. Something that is not just useful inside the game, but it's also good for workflow purposes. Because realistically, the decision to modify and tweak audio should be able to happen in complete parallel to the game, right? You shouldn't have to pause development on a feature to add a sound file for something, but that realistically often is the case, where you have to recompile or move something just because you want to tweak the pitch of a particular audio file. So using some kind of middleware really solves that problem. In industry, there's 2 biggies. There's Wise and FMOD. Wise is traditionally the big one considered to be used mostly on Unreal and mostly for AAA titles. Not to say you can't use it for smaller things, but their pricing model reflects that. They're under the impression you're using it for a large AAA studio project. And then FMOD is a lot more indie tier, and they kind of did the Unity approach of having multiple brackets where you don't have to pay that much for smaller projects, if any at all, depending on the size, and then it kind of gets bigger in price, which I appreciate. But also, similarly, with using enterprise scale stuff versus indie versus beginner, you end up with a lot more resources. And well, there's an argument to be made for learning something like Wise at scale into enterprise to get into bigger projects and what tools they might use internally. The truth is you'll find infinitely more learning resources for FMOD, and you'll find more example projects. And for people who don't know, for example, you can literally download the FMOD project for Celeste, like their audio, just the project, all of their audio, how they do it, the way each sound effect is not just played, but generated. Because a lot of that stuff isn't a sound file. It is like a procedural little mini system that generates beeps or things relative to how many words are in a sentence, crazy stuff. Like there's a lot of really cool dynamic audio you can learn. And then if you like that, there's a fun example where they took that and they took the Darkest Dungeon audio and made a snippet of that, by completely swapping out the audio. So just think of how cool that is, right? You take a game with a completely different tone and theme, and you can take the music for a different game, and in a very short period of time, retrofit the whole thing. So without even recompiling the game, that's the other thing. You don't have to recompile it because it's third party. You can completely retheme the audio for your game. Yeah. So as for the actual question, Wise versus FMOD, use whatever works. There's no right or wrong in that context, but I would say that from a usability perspective, if you've got a team and multiple people and you want to tweak it and play with things, having a tool that people can install multiple computers relatively cheaply or free, have a lot of people work on it, it's just usually easier to go with the stuff that's more scalable. And in fact, like a lot of these things, once you've learned one, migrating to the other isn't that hard. Wise is actually kind of simpler to use, but it's also more powerful feature-wise later. But FMOD, it's not like it's hard to use, right? It's like all of these, I would argue, are actually easier to use than Unity. The integration is tough initially. You have to get your head around a few different concepts. But once it's in, actually working with it as a tool, in my opinion, is infinitely easier than audio sources and clips and all the other stuff that go with that on the other side. So yeah, I recommend it as something to look into at least.
I've heard one of the benefits or main use cases for that is the issue of audio continuing to play through scene loads, where in Unity,
that's my favorite.
Yeah, if you try that, it will cut out for at least a little bit. But with these tools, you can load scenes and the audio keeps playing, that music keeps playing.
Yeah, that is like the to me that's the number one free benefit, which is that because it's middleware, it has no concept of the scene loading in Unity, and unless your computer actively freezes, for the most part, it'll run happily in parallel with whatever you're doing and any kind of switching. So it's not just that the music will keep playing. You can do something like change scenes. The next scene fires a trigger. The trigger tells the audio to switch, but the audio system doesn't switch immediately. It like nicely crossfades to the new audio after it switched scenes, all sorts of other stuff like that. That's not the strength of it, though. The real strength of it, from a like, if there's one standout feature why it's infinitely better than all the other like non-middleware solutions, is we talked about blackboards, so it kind of dovetails quite nicely. The reason we said blackboards are useful is you have a concept of flags, just stuff and information that happens in your project, and then you integrate with that stuff and do whatever actions you want. FMOD and similar lets you take a whole load of events in your project and send them to FMOD without any concept of what they do or why you do that. So for example, what surface are we standing on? How many enemies are nearby? How scary is the tone or mood of the space we're in? How many NPCs are nearby? How many footsteps are we from the nearest water source? You can do whatever the hell you like in terms of information you send, and you don't have to make a decision about what that means. And that means when you get to the game, you can say, okay, I can have a fun conversation with my sound designer and go, wouldn't it be cool if you're near water and you're at half health, the water volume increases and has a reverb because you heal in water, and we want to thematically tie those two concepts together. You can do that. And it has no impact on the gameplay because you're just saying, check these two values. If low on health and low on, and near water source, increase water source volume and increase reverb on water source. It's crazy. And also your audio can be demarcated with multiple tracks and randomizers and also event markers. That's one of my favorites. So if you have an audio track that has a cool sweeping intro, the main loop of the audio that repeats, and then a portion that goes out, you can put markers on it and tell the audio track to start from the sweeping start, loop the middle section, and then if you say you're looping while you're in combat, if you kill the last enemy, you can have it not just jump to the ending sort of fanfare, but to continue playing from where it is out to the fanfare, if that makes sense. So you get this really nice, the music never does a jump or never does like a random sound effect. It is one song, but it will actually move location in the song relative to where you are. And then combine that with stuff where a track can have multiple tracks. You can have different instruments depending on which enemies are in combat, all sorts of stuff. Either way, the point isn't there's not like a particular solution. The idea is you can completely decouple your game, stuff that happens in your game, and the creative decisions around audio, which I think is a huge missing part, because a lot of the times you make design decisions based on the limitations of the hardware and tooling you're using, and that I think is such a it's a disappointment, right? Where you're going to actively limit the possibility of your project based on, well, that would be a pain in the ass to implement. But if you can separate those two concepts, you get a lot more freedom in what you can do. And I think audio is often the mistreated child of game development. It kind of needs more love from that perspective. So I do hope more people take FMOD on, especially because it's as good as free for your projects.
It's funny that you say that, because I've been working on a big update for my coursework stuff. And after we started this conversation, I realized I've completely forgotten to do anything with audio. It's totally silent.
Everyone does. The poor audio's in the corner. No one feeds it.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah. I remember thinking when I was working, I was like, I got to remember to put some good audio stuff in there, some lessons on that. Never once. I think it's largely a side effect of the fact that I like to listen to music when I'm coding, so I never have the audio on in games because it just irritates me if I'm coding and listening to music. So yeah, that's hilarious. I wanted to share this one that somebody in chat shared. There was a little bit of discussion about it with this Master Audio 2022. Somebody said they like it.
Fun
Another
fact.
person said they're not a huge fan. So
Master Audio is the first asset on the Unity Asset Store I ever owned.
Oh.
oh, okay. Shows how much you love audio, right?
Yep. That was a long time ago. It wasn't the 2022 edition, I can tell you that much. Yeah, it's good. I do think it's a really good stopgap, but if I'm being brutally honest, it came out when Unity had no solutions for audio other than just play the sound. And since then, audio was really beefed up when they added mixers. They didn't have, like, the first version of this came out when there wasn't mixers in Unity. So it was solving buses, mixers, and a bunch of other different problems that were very fundamental. Now it's having a harder time competing on that front. One thing it does very well, though, is it's got integrations with everything. So if you use other plugins on the asset store and you don't want to fiddle with combining stuff, you can handle a lot of things like your music, having music playlists, having sound effects, having randomized sound effects, pitch modulation. All of that stuff can be done here. But in my opinion, it will eventually, you hit the same bottlenecks eventually, right? Depends on the size of your game. Like, legitimately, if I'm doing a game jam, I would use this, even over the default Unity stuff, because it's actually faster to produce things like footsteps and variations using that. But if I'm doing anything lasting longer than a month or two, I would pretty quickly migrate out to FMOD.
One thing that I wanted to bring up earlier when we were discussing the point of using middleware, Unity does a lot for you as a game engine. It contains all the basic necessities, but there are a lot of parts that you can swap out because Unity is the middleware. You want to have something rendered, but you don't want to care about the entire code related to rendering. You just offload that into Unity, or you can offload that into anything else. If you want input handled by a different tool, Unity has 2 solutions right now, and you can get even more out of the asset store. Etc., etc. But each one has its own caveats because of the ways they work and different benefits. With FMOD, the main benefit that I found is the lower iteration time because it has power tools to play audio. You don't need to enter play mode to test out how your file sounds. If you want to add modulation or the parameter in the interface, so you can author your audio faster, and even better, you don't need Unity running to do that. Somebody else can do that entirely with full competence, no need for a programmer or a game developer or assets being corrupted in a project. It's entirely separate. They can check out anything they need, make all the variations they want, figure out what works best, and then just ship it off to you. And that is one of the biggest powers of having a detached middleware, just in case it wasn't solved enough. One thing that I would say, though, is that, as you mentioned, audio is the one that gets the least attention during development. While this is true, and most developers will mute the game as they work on it, because they are trying to focus on the thing that they are testing, not the way it sounds as they do it.
And they've heard it too many times.
Yeah, it starts to repeat, it starts to lose its value, etc. One thing that is really big is that sometimes you don't check how the audio files sound altogether, and you may have some audio files that are so much wider than the rest that as soon as you enter back to hearing your game, something completely drowns out everything and it sounds terrible. On the first game jam we did in Relogic, we actually had this funk what we didn't add until like really late, and we added the music and it was working fine, and then we did sound and it was working fine, and then we heard the music with the sounds. You couldn't hear them, and then we lowered the music down, and we could finally hear them, but they were screaming weirdly because we had bad compression on them, and it was not contrasted with anything when they were in isolation, but when you had them with the music, you suddenly had, hey, this is really inconsistent. What are we doing here?
Which gets into a really interesting topic called psychoacoustics, which is that the actual audio levels of sounds are not the same as perceived audio levels of sounds. So we have different opinion of how a sound is, even if they're identical in terms of volume levels, relative to a lot of other effects of how particular wavelengths are closer together or further apart. So there's a lot of interesting studies in normalizing sound. When you start getting into what's called loudness matching, for example, if you watch a YouTube video, the naive way to do the YouTube video audio is to just normalize the audio peaks to a particular level. The more accurate way to do it is there's loudness levels for each platform. So there's loudness for television, which is kind of the original core standard because they wanted to make sure all TV shows had the same rough volume. So what you do is you loudness normalize, and it takes into account more than just peaks. It takes into account the fact that certain wavelengths are perceived louder or quieter than others. So in that example, you get into some really interesting territory where you've got multiple sounds playing over each other, and so they compound the effects on particular sound effects. And then you get the idea that it's all wavelengths at the end of the day. So when they stack together, they double the perceived effect of each. And so it gets into some really interesting territory. So yes, you do need to balance those things. And for the love of God, don't ever default your audio to 100%. Whenever you put all things together in your audio slider settings, pick 50, 770, whatever you like. Just make sure that it's not full as it starts and give them some headroom in both directions.
And if you want to be really nice and you're doing a game jam, put a slider for audio right at the first screen. That's something that I find is a real quality of life miracle in most projects that are submitted. There was a question I wanted to
before we take that question, I just wanted to see if Story Kid, he shared this link, if there's anything.
Somebody asked in the chat. They said any good sources for learning FMOD, and honestly there's loads, and this is why I suggest FMOD over Wise. Is when you type FMOD, just the word FMOD into YouTube, you'll find a lot of really good tutorial providers. One of my personal favorites here is Scott Game Sounds. So much so I bought the course, and the course is really good. I actually genuinely recommend picking it up. There's a lot of other YouTubers too that do full videos on it, and FMOD themselves have some really good introductory tutorials. There's some really interesting, unique stuff as well. Like, I don't want to get into really hyper minutiae here, but for example, audio sources tend to be a single point in space from a sphere of audio, right? And so you're listening to it from one place, which makes perfect sense. But what if you're standing near a stream? How does that work? Where does the sound source go on the stream when you're trying to listen to it? And so you can put a sound source, dot it multiple times in it, but now you get some really weird relative distance audio over the levels, all sorts of kind of stuff. So there's some really interesting math and calculations you can do to effectively draw a line from you to the river, find the points in the line, create distributions across, average the volume level of how many points there would be, and get a rough estimate sound, place the audio source on a good position relative to you, and then modulate the volume relative to how close and far away you are. It's complicated stuff, far beyond my understanding of maths, but there are courses out there and examples, and I don't know if it is Scott Game Sound specifically, but someone on YouTube did a really good video where they go through in vivid detail. They do a river, they do a sound source, and they go through how to make audio sound even coming from a non-standard shaped audio source, like walking along a riverbed, right? So and you can do that even without FMOD, by the way. But it's FMOD makes this stuff easier, but you can do most of that stuff with any positional audio system.
One thing to bring up is that Unity has a new splines package, and that package lets you alpha splines really, really easily. And it has actually rather good methods to find the closest point to a given object in the scene on the spline. So if you want, you can just have a spline that shows the way of your river, and then the player being closest to it, you can literally just ask, hey, give me the closest point to that player, and then you can just locate the audio there. It's really powerful, especially if you can make some audio effects follow the player as they leave for more gradual fall off.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a cool idea, because you could just move that audio source along that spline to wherever the nearest position is, and then adjust that volume based on your distance.
Yeah. In my medieval environment pack, the demo scene uses a river from RAM, Nature Manufactures RAM, which is spline based. And so the audio of the river follows that spline, does exactly that. If it gets the closest point to the player, and then the volume is based on the distance. There's one issue I had where there was a point at which the closest point went, there's a loop in the river, and the closest point went from here to here rather than kind of nicely. And so it just suddenly jumped to the other side of you'd be on the left, and all of a sudden you'd move forward and the river would be on your right. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on?
Wait,
So
there's
Yeah,
a loop in your river?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was like
for
a
that-
little horseshoe shape.
U-turn. Yeah.
A U-turn.
Yeah, for that you usually want something like a.
like a
You can
Yeah,
interpolate,
lazy
right?
river.
You can have it lerp across and use some kind of like smoothing, so it'll slide slowly over it. So it kind of it's still janky, but it'll makes it a bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I guess
technically
just
speaking-
Sorry,
Technically speaking, if you are different distances from the river, it's still the river. You're supposed to hear it at the same like distance. The closest point is going to give you the most consistent audio.
Yeah, so you'd probably then have to do that math and figure out, okay, how close are you to various points, and then do the center
well,
point.
that's that's the more fancy solution. Is it's not a point, because what you want to do is presume an equidistant series of imaginary sound sources, and then aggregate the amount of them within radial range of you, and then get a composite what would be hypothetically volume if you were near 4 of them versus 6, and then you place it at the center point of all of those points and give it that volume. So it's a bit more involved, but the concept is still there.
And
then
then
your
there's a
player will get
slider
mute
for your
audio.
left or right.
Yeah,
You got to do your slider for your left or right, so you get it on the right side.
Just to round up your before we jump audio, because I love this topic. I could talk about this for a long time. I just want to highlight too, because to the point about audio being the unloved child of the game industry, I cannot express how not only is it just it adds to the experience. There's some really interesting stuff with if you understand audio. Now I don't, by the way. This is not my area, but I like watching people who do and listen to them explain it. And if you want a really good example of this, there's a load of YouTube videos of sound engineers listening to game soundtracks for the first time. And a really good example of this is all the soundtrack stuff from Undertale. And you can find people who are industry audio engineers listening to Undertale songs for the first time, and they're just listening to how the song goes. And they're going, okay, so it's happening here, and then they're using, that there's kind of a happy chord here and a sad chord here. And they're able to deduce the relationship the player has to the character they're fighting exclusively through the sound design. Because if you have a character who's got this sort of relationship with the player where it's sometimes negative or positive and how that goes back and forth, you end up with this really interesting idea where there are ways to create sound, if you understand audio engineering, that has undertones of sadness. Like, for example, there's something called the blue note, which is used a lot in blues because it adds a tinge of sadness to the way things are played. And so good people who know their audio can actually sell a narrative with the audio. And to me, that's fascinating. That, like, it's not just the sound that plays during a fight. If you know what you're doing and you close your eyes, you're like, there's an intuitive understanding that, okay, this is a fight which has an epic start, implies sort of a heroic tale, but as the fight goes on, more sadness notes creep in, but then there's this moment of triumph midway through when it switches tones, and like you can tell a whole story. And watching somebody describe an entire character arc exclusively from listening to 2 minutes of audio and having never played the game is fascinating to me. So don't undervalue audio, please.
No, and also when you're doing fights in your game, stop doing the bit where you have a music track going and then suddenly you jump to the fight thing and then the person runs away from the fight and the fight drops off and then you jump to blend them in and build on the audio you've got running. Don't just keep switching them out. I played a game recently, I can't remember what it's called, but literally I was running in and out of rooms and it was it's like, oh my god, I want to kill somebody.
Same with biomes, right? When there's like, oh, there's a waterfall near me, but if I take one step to the right, the waterfall disappears.
It's absolutely irritating as hell.
And this is like that's touching the surface of this, right? I don't get into the whole thing about leitmotifs. Like leitmotifs are this whole idea, like leitmotifs because there's a particular sound that plays whenever it sees Darth Vader, and you know what that sound is, and you don't even need to. You'll picture the character as soon as you hear that sound. And Undertale does this a lot, where it's not just per person. There's soundtracks that mean certain people. There's melodies that mean certain environments. There's melodies that imply certain characters. And so when a character has a relationship with another character, but they're not on screen, you can get a sense of why am I getting a sense or thinking of this other character, even though I'm not seeing them on screen. And then some narrative reveal that the characters are related in some way. You knew you had a context for it, but you didn't know why because the audio is cueing you in that there's a relationship between these two ideas. So again, audio is fantastic. Don't undervalue it.
And it's such a great system to build. I mean, we sat in a meeting once where we were talking about, we got a room that you're walking up to, you're outside, and then you're walking up to this room, and the room's got a radio playing in it. Is the door open? Because that will, if it's what the radio's playing, is the window open? Is the window at the back of the actual room open? And then you're hearing it from the other side of the house coming over the top to you, and just having to build those volumetric stuff and everything. It's fantastic.
The cues you can I mean, we're not even composers, I don't think any of us are, but imagine if we were people who actually thought about music and audio for a living, the idea of using just instruments to me as a cue is super cool, especially with the mixer and now and FMODs as well. You can bring in the different stems, and you can imagine, okay, you walk into a castle area and you're friendly with all the people there because of the decisions you made in the game. So it has certain instruments like the flute, because the flute's a happy instrument and it sounds happy. But if you had made different decisions in the game and the people in the castle don't like you, now you've got the low bass sound. Same song, same melodies, but it sounds completely different because you've removed one instrument, use another instrument to give you the subtle cue that, oh, they're not liking you here, you know. But if they do like you, then the music's happy. Same music, different sound.
And it's not just, again, not just these cases. Like, here's another one. So cool. Mario 64. You ever played Mario 64? There's a part when you get near the end and you're like climbing the staircase to fight Bowser. If you haven't got enough stars, the door opens up, still lets you go there, but you can't reach him. It's an infinite staircase. And as you run, the staircase infinitely loops you. And they use something called the shepherd's tone specifically on that staircase. Because what the shepherd's tone does is it consistently sounds like it's increasing in pitch. It obviously doesn't like let go forever, but it audibly sounds like the sound is continually increasing. Which again, think of how that like narratively implies the staircase. It's an infinitely increasing sound that matches the infinite running you're doing. Like, so cool.
Yeah, in the asset store, there are actually some music assets that actually are all broken up into sections that you can put in your mixer and then actually turn off each section to build up or set tones and all the rest of it. So when you're buying a music package from an ambient music package from the asset store, make sure you get one that has all these parts to it that you can break up and set up and down. Can't remember what.
And if you're looking for the word, the word for the separations is stems, and the actual audio. I can't remember the audio asset you're talking about, but I think it's called something loops or something. I know the one you have. I bought that myself.
There's a whole series of them, and I've bought a ton of them.
I would say that it might be my series because all the music we've produced is exactly set up like that with that exact point in mind. There's even a handy dandy script that lets you export all your audio mixes to clips with one click of the button. Just press play, press this button, and it'll export all your different mixes together. And so you can have all your exported tracks mixed. So,
yeah. Which again, by the way, it's not just about adding it. Like the benefit isn't just that. It's like we said, drop that directly into FMOD, press play, and it works normally. But then go in, take like the melody portion and gate it on only appears when there's more than 4 enemies on screen or something. Suddenly you've got dynamic audio, and like it doesn't seem like a big deal, but things massively increase. It's much better.
It's the juice. It's the bit of juice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. One more thing to bring up again. This is entirely easy to add. People that are working on the FMOD side literally can just add a variable and they have everything they need to get going. You didn't even add a single line of code yet. And you only need to provide one variable of is it the condition or not, or the amount of things that are required. For example, number of enemies. It's as simple as one line of code plus the counting that you do on the programmer side. But usually you would do that for very different tasks.
And then there's like, without getting go on forever, is you can have a variable that's like how slick or wet is the surface, or is it raining? And you can use that to just alter how much like muffled reverb or whatever else you have on the audio. And there's such small things, but like players notice when you're going around and you enter a cave and the cave sound, suddenly the music is playing but like echoed slowly, slightly differently. It's like, it's so satisfying, especially when it doesn't have that hard cut sound that we talked about earlier when you transition between regions.
So Parker asked in chat while we're on audio, what format is best for sound or music effects? Does it actually matter on this? Like, do people need to care if they're pulling in a wave or
an awful lot?
Yeah. So let's start with the specifics. Every sound format was made with different strategies and contains different information. And some of this information results in more sound quality in the end of the day. There is a level that is separate from what each sound format contains. And some of them were made to be played more efficiently than others at the expense of not having freeform seeking. So for example, I think it was MP3 that can't actually seek back because each sound portion depends on the previous portion before it on the execution level. So it's harder to do certain effects like looping because you would need to start tracking from the start to the point that you wanted to loop to. There are soundtracks that will specifically contain looping points. So you can offer that into the sound file itself, but others won't give you that option. So it does matter which type you're working in. It's especially more annoying that some of them have different standards for how loud each bit of sound should be. So yeah, do your search on that.
Yeah, and then there's like you want to pick different sounds whether you're doing streaming or whether you're actually like preloading it based on different time for compression. And there's also small tweaks like loading MP3 into memory has a small blip because it's like, for people who don't know, MP3 is a paid format. Like we don't pay for it ourselves, but somebody has to pay for MP3 for you to use MP3. That's why even things like Linux don't actually come with MP3 installed. You have to install codecs for that after the fact. But if you use it and you're using it in audio in Unity, for example, it won't loop perfectly. There's like a little blip when it loads the next loop into it, but it will for a lot of other formats. And then, so not only that, there's also size. Like, it's really hard to explain how once you start adding audio properly to a project, it's right up there with textures that people don't think about. Just add a couple of 8K textures and your project size balloons. And never mind audio. Audio can get absolutely huge. So you have to marry how much is compression versus not. So you'll actively pick different settings for audio if it's musical. Like, music isn't going to be in memory all the time versus audio sound effects that are going to be constantly pulled and fired regularly. So that's an important factor. The general like TLDR is, if you want to look into it, there's like split it up vaguely around fast firing frequent sound effects and then longer form music. So MP3 is good for music because it's small sized, quality isn't as important, can play for long terms, is usually okay. But for sound effects and things, you want to lean into the OOGs or some version in that category. And then Wave have good quality, but they're large file size. There's do your research specifically into what suits your project, but they matter. They matter a lot. And that doesn't even get into bit rates. Like, when you actually save out your audio files, you want to make sure bit rate is the thing that makes it bigger. That's the best, that's the quality, right? So this is the difference between CD quality music versus FLAC or whatever other version you're getting higher up there. You want to make sure that it's compressed on a good bit rate. It's also the thing you can most sacrifice. Most people don't have an ear for super high sound effects, especially sound effects that are played quickly. So you could have a small file format, but a really big bit rate, and you're screwing yourself because you've got a really big file that nobody will notice. But you could have a expensive file format but a really small bit rate, and it works perfectly fine because explosions are meant to be crunchy, right? You don't need that particular level of fine-grained detail. So research, that's the as Uri said, that's the short answer.
Nice raw audio format sitting on playing on a mobile phone. It's like, yeah, good job. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
So
before we go on to this question, sorry, I just wanted to say thanks real quick for the super chat for R. Smith, and also to the new awesome indie member Spider Language over lunch, because this just popped up. I wanted to just say thanks in advance before we jump into some other stuff. Sorry, go ahead. You all right?
Oh yeah, well, just to end the audio before we go, because there's one last thing. Someone asked a question I wanted to get to before we jump further. That is the default audio fine, or should you use something else? Plot twist, default Unity uses FMOD. Even if you don't install FMOD or do anything with FMOD, you're using FMOD because that's what Unity uses to do its audio. It's just not using the official external middleware solution. It's using an older form of FMOD. So yes, Unity audio is fine. It's using a good system. It's just using an older version of a good system. So
yeah. And one more thing I wanted to bring up before we leave the topic of audio is that in Terraria, we used to load all the audio files for music in the game at once when the game booted. It would add like 20 seconds of game loading time and a lot of memory that we're just almost never using because you only play one of like 40 tracks. But in the 1.4 update, we added about 40 more tracks, and then we hit an issue. The game would actually run out of memory before we got to the main menu, because the game is 32-bit and we only have like 4 gigabytes total that we can use, and 1 gigabyte is used for the tiles. So there is a cost to just loading the files wholesale. Streaming the files in is very useful, not just because it lowers the amount of memory you're constantly using, but because it also increases the loading time. Instead of loading all the audio files, however long they take at their full quality, we load one tiny piece of the one track that we need to use like once a second. It's a gigantic change, and it required almost no code changes at all.
Nice. So that was an easy change for you to make to get that huge, get rid of the 20-second load?
Well, on our end, we also wanted to add resource packs, which would let people load whatever sound file they want. So we had to do a full rewrite. But in Unity's case, it's literally a drop-down box on whether it's streamed or whether it's loaded ahead of time. So,
all right. Well, I think we should jump over to that saved question. Yori, you ready for it? It's something we were talking about earlier, and it came up again, and it was Exit asked, how common is it to gather many mono behaviors of the same type and have a certain mono behavior manager that runs the update content on all of those? Because they've seen some big improvements for that. So it's essentially like you've got a bunch of enemies and you have an update on them, and you replace that with an enemy manager that calls update on every enemy, or maybe calls like tick on every enemy or something. So talk a little bit about that. You're right. I think this is going to be an interesting one.
So a friend of mine asked me that exact question with different nuance around it. The short gist is it's common, especially as you start targeting lower end devices or you start needing way more entities in your scene. Because Unity live cycle methods, which is the update, late update, fixed update, awake, start, all of these methods are handled by Unity's end, which means they have to do the finding, then remembering what the pointers to these methods in your classes are, and then calling those methods for you with whatever layers of abstractions they have from their C++ layer. They're doing a lot of extra work per update call, whereas if you do the update calls, you know exactly what you're doing. You're staying in the C# domain, whatever code you wrote, you know exactly where to go to performance-wise. So you cut down a lot of the steps needed to call your update method. And that gives you both better performance, but more importantly, it gives you more control. Not everything needs to update every frame. Not everything needs to update at the same delta time. Not everything needs to update at the same parameters, effectively. So making your own update manager is extremely beneficial. And the FPS improvements can be massive, especially if you can start doing them in parallel, which is what the dots or entity component system in Unity's case is specialized into doing with the job system. So yes, update managers are common. Update managers are fantastic. Almost every big game that I tried looking into or asked the developers of say that they have eventually abandoned the update methods for most of their essential classes. The stuff that are on the side that you don't need to care about, that you don't have too many of, feel free to use whatever is simplest, but you can get gigantic benefits.
Yep, that was my experience. It's one of the first things that one of the first big improvements I made in a Unity game that I was working on. The first time I was making a game in Unity, I was like, oh, so just switching this to a little manager to manage my units and run the update, the huge performance improvement, especially once we went on to device. So I would see it in the editor, everything seemed totally fine, but then it push it on to the, at that time it was the iPhone 1 and the iPhone 3GS, I think. I forget the exact one. I was right around the 3GS or lower. And yeah, it would just destroy them. I mean, this is on a 4 and a 6. Right? You can see the difference. Like, it was really bad. So it's definitely something should be using, especially on those objects where there's a lot of them. I feel like.
Plus, I'd argue there's also a benefit to kind of conceptual complexity as well, which I think is often understated, which is a component model benefits from the fact that you don't have to think about the relationship between different objects. The whole idea is I can place a light in the scene, and a light might have a camera associated with it, or a color or something, and things can update and rotate, and it does its own thing. And then over here, I can have a character who's doing thinking at a tick rate of whatever they want to do. And that works fine, but if you ever had that weird scenario where you turn off objects and all of a sudden logic is still happening somewhere and you don't know where it's happening because one of the update scripts is still running, that's easy to happen because it's very easy to kind of misstep the relationship between a game object and a behavior. And the whole fact that a game object is a different thing than a behavior, and behaviors exist as part of components exist as game objects, that relationship can get a little bit hazy sometimes. But if you keep some consistent rule in place, like these objects register themselves with some update manager, and then the objects parent themselves to their parent. And so, for example, a character updates, and when a character updates its logic for A, B, C, and D. You end up with a really clean hierarchy such that you don't end up with race conditions. You don't end up with weird scenarios where one system has to be updated before the other. And you can also control pausing and even alternate delta time ticks per object. So you can have things run at different ticks by passing in a slow time. So the enemy does everything it's still doing, but does it at half the speed for some special ability. All of that can be managed at a more kind of global scale because you're basically controlling that flow as like a tree structure, you know?
The other thing is to know when to not have an update in your component as well. If you're running one function at the end of a frame after that component starts off, then just put it as a coroutine with something in the start and get rid of your update, and then destroy it if necessary.
Yeah, to expand on that, so an update call, even if empty, even if you return on the very first line of code, you're still paying the cost of calling that method. There is a cost to entering and exiting methods. And if you do that a lot of times over a lot of frames, you're going to accumulate some frame cost. When you use a coroutine, it doesn't do anything until it's created. Then it's starting up, it does whatever it needs to do, waiting to whatever endpoints it needs. But once it's done, it leaves the update calls forever, and it doesn't make you pay the cost until whatever other time comes. For the question on whether making an update manager is essentially Dots, it's not. Dots has a lot going for it that is above the idea of a custom update manager. With Dots, you bunch up the data that is similar so that you can iterate on it faster. You're doing it per system, not per object. An update manager can update the same types of objects all at once, but it can do any amount of functions within a single update. For example, you can make a unit move, you can make a unit interact with anything that it would interact with, take damage, open up a container to look at all the items, take the most expensive one, equip it, look fancier, spawn some particles, then teleport to, I don't know, Tahiti, and then all of that stuff can happen in a single update call. It lets you interact with every other available information in your game, which has a performance cost going around to different pointers in memory.
I do think if you want, so I find personally that this is much easier when you use kind of real world visual metaphors. So say, for example, you're expecting a UPS delivery. Now, you can stand at your door and wait for the delivery driver to arrive. How much work can you get done when you're standing at your door waiting for the driver? Not a lot. All of your attention is focused on this task. You're updating your state of checking for the driver all the time. An alternative option is you can go back to your desk and subscribe to some event system where they will text you, or you have a security camera doorbell where when they get near, it pings. So now you can do all of the work you wanted to do, and then when it arrives, you can go and do it. That's better because you're not wasting those cycles on something unnecessary. The downside is if you're expecting 2 packages and they both happen to arrive, you have to get up, go for the package, collect it, come back, sit down again, go up, get a package for the next one, and collect it. And that means that you're doing double that work when if they happen at the same time, you could simplify that task by doing both at the same time. And that's got its own benefits, but here's the other problem. To kind of dovetail back to what we were saying before about stacks and queues, what if you're not there to pick it up? The driver may arrive and you're not at the door this time and the event didn't go off or there wasn't an association. So what you can do is you could have a queue. So basically imagine a container where the driver arrives, pops something in the box for you, and then you don't actually have to have your event tied to them. You can have an event that says check every 5 minutes, and regardless of whether they arrived at any given time, your event fires to go check, and you can take whatever happens to be there by doing an update of, is there something in the box? Take it. Is there something in the box? Take it. So your update is only for the duration of in-between events that you check. So there's a lot of this sort of like back and forth play you have to do between updates give you more real-time information, events are more delayed, but events are cheaper. But if you have multiple things happening at once, you don't want to have to run it multiple times. So you have to play this game of performance.
Where did that question go? So there was a question about coroutines, kind of following up on this. Anybody want to take it? So there's just Shattered Soul Studios was asking if there are any downsides to coroutines, right? Because Dave, you were mentioning using them instead of updates in a couple scenarios where people just check stuff every frame and they don't really need to. You can talk a little bit about coroutines. Do you use coroutines a lot?
No,
I
sorry.
use
No,
them a
it's-
decent amount, not a lot, but a decent amount on
Yeah,
small things very often.
The specific thing here is that the specific part I was talking about there was having a coroutine just off the start, because you're setting something up on your object after the first frame or after a certain time period, and you're not going to have the update. So some people will just have an update there that says, okay, has an update loop run on this object? Now I can do some extra setup. Now I can leave. And I'd never call that update again, but the update's still going.
Like
whereas
a
you
was
just use a
initialized flag that it's
Yeah.
checking, and then if it wasn't, it just exits back out every time.
Exactly. You could do some of those things in coroutines. Some of the problems with coroutines is a lot of times it's how badly they're written in even the Unity tutorials. Like you have some people that say yield, return, new, wait for seconds, and all the rest of it, whereas you can just create that wait for seconds outside of that, and you don't have to new it every single time you go into it. And that's a little optimization thing for you. And sometimes people
It could
just
be a
leave
big
them
one
alone.
depending on if you're in a loop, right? If you're in a loop.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
can
yeah.
be a
And
big optimization.
sometimes they're
bigger.
just left around. And it's just sometimes I feel like they're used just as a sort of how to put this nicely without telling a lot of people they're idiots.
A shortcut to avoiding loops because they don't understand the difference. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Bad management of your game loop. Oh, I'll just chuck a coroutine in there instead of doing it. It's again going back to what Jesse just said. It's about how you design and how you design your components and how you're designing everything that's running through. Like sticking a component on every asteroid in an asteroid field and then wondering why your game's slow. Oh, they've all got updates on them, doing a turn because I didn't want to use the animation system. Well, guess what? Be easier, better, and optimized if you use the animation system.
It's kind of probably worth explaining what they are. I think that's the other problem. I don't think people have a good understanding of what a coroutine actually is. The short answer at a very, very basic level is if I had a to-do list to cook something, to make a cake or to make a sandwich, that is a series of linear steps. And if we run that, we could run it all from top to bottom, and your kind of attention is focused one thing down to the next. All that a coroutine is doing is it is chopping that up based on each yield you do into sub-steps. So rather than make the sandwich from top to bottom, which includes, or make the dinner, which includes cutting the vegetables and stuff, you could cut a step called vegetable stuff, wait a second, do other stuff, wait a second, do other stuff. And giving that break makes sense in the context of your game is like a person trying to do 10 things at once. They're trying to do the dishes, do the laundry, and cook the dinner at the same time. And if they have to do all of that stuff at once, they're frozen because they only got a certain amount of time per tick or frame, right? Because that's what your game is doing based on update loop. So the game freezes or when you've given it too much work to do in too short of a period of time. So the entire point of a coroutine is to say, okay, if I give you this 10 things to do in one go, it'll be too hard for you to do in one frame and the game will suffer performance as a result. So we're going to pause for a second, chop this up into smaller chunks, and we'll do each frame or each update cycle and loop. The first thing to note about that is it's not asynchronous. These things are not happening in parallel. They are just pausing for a second between breaks so that it's like, do the drawing, do the update, do the rendering. Okay, we've overrun our time frame, this frame. Let's pause, wait till the next frame, and then or do the cycle again. So it is better for performance from that perspective, but it's not ideal. And if you want to get really in depth into this, if you decompile a coroutine and just like look at the source code generated, it is a case statement. It is literally do task, case 0, case 1, case 2, case 3. And all it does is it does the first one, increments the number, next time round does the second one, increments the number, third time round increments the number. So you're splitting it up based on that step. So that's kind of what you need to think about when you're doing this. Like what is the point of doing this? You're splitting these things up to make it easier to chunk effectively. They are powerful if you know when to use them and use them correctly. It's also worth noting that each coroutine is an entire class. So something that always bothers me is when people start talking about, oh, it's a waste of time to generate 2 classes or to make a unique class for this object or whatever. If I made a class which has 4 coroutines, like wait till spawning waves, spawn each wave, spawn each enemy in the wave, and each one is running in a coroutine, and I look at the source code for that, the script may be 40 lines or 20 lines, but this generated file might be 400 lines because I've actually created a class with its own closure, with its own switch statement, with its own code in between each switch statement, and all the variables associated with it. Am I saying don't use them? No, but I'm saying you have to understand what it's doing, which means that a lot of the arguments around should I use my own state machine or should I use coroutines, you're not saving the time or the energy or the classes by using a coroutine. You're just doing it, but you're letting the compiler do it for you. And that might be okay, but you might get more performance / easier to read code if you just write the classes yourself. So it is worth understanding what they are, and we can go into a whole thing later about the relationship between that and IEnumerables and what they actually are, and then how you might compare the fact that coroutines are not asynchronous, but then tasks are, even though they're also case statements when you decompile them for a whole different thing, but they are asynchronous from the perspective of running on threads. There's a lot in this topic, but suffice to say, I won't write off coroutines. I do think they're very valuable to use, mostly because of that original thing I talked about. If your attention is focused exclusively sitting at the front door trying to wait for the delivery driver, you can't get a lot of work done. But if you at least split the task up and then run a task, you can have tasks that run only when they need to. So I would prefer if people use them more correctly, but I think rather than having people mistakenly put too much in update or mistakenly run too many coroutines, I'll take the too many coroutines.
So, to sum up what you both said perfectly, the downsides of coroutines are, first off, they are a class. You are generating an object, you are giving it state, and you're delegating the state to that object. Once you start a coroutine, you also don't know any more information about it unless you extract it out somewhere else, which means you start a coroutine, you can't know any information about the contents of that coroutine until it's done or until it reports back to you. Whereas if you had your own class, you can have public members. Those public members can be looked at whenever you want. Another thing is it's very easy to misuse coroutines. As David mentioned, if you make new wait objects every time you want to wait, you're generating new objects, allocating memory that you want to be reusing. You can reuse wait objects. One of the main benefits of coroutines specifically is the ability to wait until a certain condition happens, which is something that you don't get with an update. If you had your own update cycle, every time that you want to check, hey, if I am in step 0, step 1, step 2, did 2 seconds pass since step 0 so I can try step 1? Is the player in the location that he needs to be for step 2 yet? All these things can be cleaned up as you write coroutine so that it's very simple conditions and you just wait until they're ready. This is their main benefit, but it also comes at the cost of you needing to understand how to write your waits. So yeah, they have a lot of benefits. The downsides are easy misuse and allocating memory. That's it.
So Dave, I have a question for you. If you've got some event that you need, like, let's say your player took some damage and you want him to be invulnerable for 5 seconds and there's no update loop on your player already, would you kick off a coroutine to just flip that flag back off after 5 seconds? Or would you add in an update loop or do something completely different?
I usually have that stuff in update loops.
So you would just have an update loop in there, or put that in.
That class is going to have a ton of stuff going on.
To be fair, if it has an update loop already, you're not losing much, I guess.
Exactly.
Right. No, I'm just thinking. I mean, I think on a player, it's going to have an update loop. But say it's something else that's small that, when it gets a collision after 5 seconds, it does something, and that's the entirety of the class. Isn't that a coroutine or an update?
And here is the point. This is the design thing between having that update loop and having a coroutine for it. A lot of people, when they use coroutines, they just put them in coroutines and then they have 20 odd, 30 odd coroutines going on this one particular class. Whereas if you're just going to do that one thing, sure, put it in a coroutine if it doesn't have an update already. I just don't come across a lot of scenarios in my own setup that I need to create those coroutines for, because a lot of those classes have updates.
Especially when you can do
an update going, I'm going to use the update.
Especially when you can do it architecturally, like you said. Like if I have a scenario where there's a flag in my system that needs to be set, from a testing perspective, why would I use a coroutine when I can just have a reset flag method and then I can test that easily outside of it, and then I could subscribe to an event saying thing happened, call reset flag, and I get all the same benefits with none of the extra cruft and mess,
Yeah, and I just wanted to look at the link I just sent you is the Unity execution order. this is possibly one of the most valuable web pages that Unity has brought. And if you haven't seen this yet and you're developing for Unity, straight after this video, go look at it, read it, put it to memory, store it as a bookmark, and have it available. Because so many people ask so many questions about, where's my coroutine getting called? When is my update? When is my fixed update? When is this animated move thing going away? My triggers going? This thing just gives you it all in a nice flow chart for you to look at. Because a lot of people don't really like the whole, is my coroutine running alongside all my other code in parallel? No, it's after your update. You can see that
right
on
here.
this execution order. Yeah. And this is it. And people need to know this particular one. So if you haven't ever looked at the execution order in the manual in Unity, just.
And if you have a printer, what I did was I printed this thing out and I just had it on my desk for the first year or two after I found it. It was just sitting there, and I would just occasionally see it. If I ever thought about something, just look, or occasionally I had to look at it and be like, oh yeah, I forgot that method even existed. Like, oh crap, like look at this.
Not gonna lie, I still check it out from time to time. I'm like, wait, when does the on became invisible call like happen again? Sometimes you just need to re-reference it, right? You don't remember the whole offhand.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some animation stuff that actually you can just bring out a like on animation move or whatever it was called. I can't remember. Yeah,
an animated move.
Yeah, that is a call that comes up in your component that you can actually use with your animator, and it's there. It's one of these little things, like a lot of the videos I put out, it's just these obscure little things that nobody knows because they don't read the documentation and sit there and go through it. I'm one of those weird people that does. But yeah, if you haven't looked at this link, go look at it if you're building Unity a lot.
There is one thing I want to mention, which is not mentioned in this document, which needs to be called out, is that there are things here for rendering on pre-render, on post-render. Those are not called in the scriptable render pipeline. Unity had made some upgrades and it moved some stuff. So those became events you can subscribe to, I think, in a different class. I'm trying to remember now, begin frame rendering, I think it was something like that. So while this may be of use to you, do make sure that the events that you're looking at get called. Not
yeah, the on-render stuff used to have to be a component that was on the camera as well. So it was the same game object as the camera itself to actually do anything. So you see loads of forum messages with, this isn't working. Well, it's not sitting next to your camera, so it's not going to work. So yeah, it's just being aware of some of that stuff.
Or that secret info. Somebody mentioned in chat, I'm not sure what this was, doing a void. They had a void methods that were made into coroutines with a yield break. Anybody know what that is?
I'm assuming that's more tasks rather than coroutines. I think that might have been a misunderstanding.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is, but if you got an example, I'd be curious to kind of check that out. We did get over 100 likes, so I wanted to do the giveaway real quick. I figured I'd just give away... got an Odin license and a Rider license left. And I think there might be some other stuff, but I figured I'd at least do those two. So kick off an Odin giveaway, and let's do that one real quick. You guys mind if we give away a copy of Odin and Specter real quick? Let me find the little giveaway thing. I pulled in the new questions that you guys submitted and that everybody else submitted. So we should have... Here, I'm going to go on to the next question. We should have a couple questions here. Well, yeah, that seems like a good one. So the first question that popped up, all you've got to do to vote or to enter to win is put in A, B, C, or D to pick the letter of the one that's the correct answer. And if you get the correct answer, then you get selected, and you could win the Odin license. It'll just randomly pick somebody who got it right. So go ahead and vote. Put in whatever you think the answer is for how many assets are in the New Year's sale, the asset store New Year's sale. I'll pause this so everybody has a couple extra seconds to take a look. Maybe we'll link the asset store too, so everybody can.
And to clarify, it's lowercase letters only. It doesn't yet handle uppercase.
That
right?
is true. Yes, thank you for calling that out.
And if you put in a new letter, a different letter, it will replace your old vote.
Yes, it will. It will update you and pull you up to the latest. And I think there's a if you just click on the link for the sale. Here we go. I'll drop it into chat. Cancel, paste.
If you just wait long enough and see what everyone else is saying.
Yeah. So whatever.
It seems to be a mixed message.
Huh?
There's a lot of people put in A and C.
I have no idea what the answer is. Now I'm curious. I gotta go make sure that I have the correct answer in here. So before it ends, I'll pause it and let Andrew tell me what the correct answer is. There's definitely a lot of stuff in the asset store sale, though.
Trying to scroll down, there was a question I wanted to answer just before the answer started coming in.
That's gone. You've lost that now.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Let me go find I'm gonna go find the answers real quick so I can make sure that I've got the correct one. I'm really worried. Last time I had the wrong answer in a bunch of these. So what are we looking at?
Oh, there we go. I found it.
Okay.
Is the right answer up there?
Well, is the right answer C?
Correct. Oh yes, it's still right. It was right last week, but if anyone had removed their asset from the store for some reason, like if you just say remove this asset, then it would go down. So I was thinking, oh shit, it's been a week. Maybe one of these assets has been removed. I don't know.
Well, congrats to Blood Air 1011. Please email me as soon as you can at jason@game.courses, and I will send you the code right now. Also, if you won last week, please email me and let me know what you won and send me the info, and I'll get those prizes out. So congrats on the Odin Inspector license. It's definitely worth using. It's one of my favorite tools. I literally pull it into just about every project. And then I guess in a few minutes, we'll do the giveaway for the writer license. Let's jump back into talking about some stuff. So you're right.
So you're saying I have to email you, Jason, to say that I won your fancy massage chair, right? I have to email you about that.
Yes, but you have to come pick it up.
No, never mind.
Local pickup only.
You're not going to make him ship it.
I've still got one stuck in a room that I haven't moved out because it's too damn heavy, and I don't want to kill myself breaking my back. Those things are not fun. That said, I got one from Best Buy on sale, $200. Crazy deal, and it's really nice for $200. It's like this little, almost like a mini massage chair, but it's like a full-on chair. Good stuff. I definitely want to share that one and talk about it sometime. If I ever get around to doing tech reviews, I'll definitely share that thing because it was by far worthwhile. Not as good as the crazy massage chairs, but still a lot better than the Acer massage chair that I bought before. So I bought a lot of massage chairs. I have a problem. It's an issue. My wife knows.
I hope it gets better.
Pixel Shroom. No, you don't need to email again. If you already emailed me at the beginning of the stream, I'll be checking those afterwards. So we'll jump into those right afterwards. Okay. Now you said you're all right. There was a question.
Yeah. So there was a question from I'm Introvert. Guys, what tools can we use for reproducing bugs coming from QA? I thought it was extremely fitting given we were talking about Odin just now. But let's just talk about this real quick. So when you have a bug coming from QA, they are giving you steps to reproduce. Those steps would usually entail creating some scenario in your application so that something would go wrong. You can try and rig a situation so that you will get a perfect reproduction of what is going on, but you have to make sure it's rather genuine, because if there was some step not implied but not explicitly called out in the reproduction steps that you were given, and you're not repeating that, you may have an issue where you can't recreate the exact problem. So if you want to have a tool to do that, usually developer commands that can give you access to menus very quickly. For example, sending you into like 5 menus deep with one press of a button is really useful, or spawning some enemies, killing them, and seeing that they die correctly. There are many tools that you can write specific to your application, but if you need something more generalized, there are tools to automate certain clicks, and there are tools to just give yourself buttons to do stuff and call events that are already existing. Do you guys have anything that you use frequently?
If you're doing this in VR, it's especially useful as well. If you have to get into a headset and go through a menu and do all the rest to get to where you want to be, reproducing this stuff could take forever. So yeah, I always have a load of editor windows that enable me to jump through menus, jump through game states, and all that sort of thing. Like I have a node system for my game state. So it goes from playing, and if something happens, it goes to other things. And my editor on my game manager will basically have all these states that I can literally press the transitions for. So it just lists them all. So I don't actually have to go and perform anything. I could just press the transitions. Now, as Euro stated, sometimes that means you won't reproduce the QA. So if you get a QA report with a lot of bug steps and you use your quick steps, and you're like, oh, it didn't actually happen. Go and do it the way the QA person did it just before you tell them they're an idiot. Because yeah, I've seen that happen where people are just like using the quick and debug and cheat steps to get to something, and then they're like, it doesn't happen, and they get into a fight with QA over it.
You need a T-shirt, the classic one that says "Can't reproduce on my machine." You know, that's the
On my
defense argument. Yeah.
I wanted to say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just say I did a lot of QA when I started doing game development, and one of the things that helps a lot, if you can't reproduce it, is having them actually just record a little video clip of the actual process. Just record a clip of the 2 minutes or the minute that it takes to get up there, because if usually it's the case of there is one little step or one setup thing on their character or on their setup that you don't know about and don't have, and that they're not calling out because it's not something that's an obvious part or an obvious reason that would cause the problem. So if you set it up that way, have them actually record it, and you watch that video, you'll see a lot of the times the thing that stands out, or screenshots. If you can't do video, screenshots at the very least. I really like the ones done with like Snagit, where you just add a little remarks and lines and stuff. But I find that helps a lot. And then when you figure out what the actual cause was, especially if it's a weird one, telling the QA people what the problem was, I find helps a lot too, because then they start to kind of think a little bit more broadly on the things that could be causing the problem, and then they'll start to rule these things out a little bit more, or test with this item or without this item, or with this setting on or without the setting on, once they realize that that's what the cause was. So actually giving them the root cause, not just the solution, so that it's fixed, when it makes sense, if they don't already know what the root cause is.
Yeah, it's worth noting that there's different phases of testing, right? And one of my favorite phrases for that is a ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So you can deal with QA having issues and then try to solve it later, but if possible, obviously not having them hit QA is even better. So in order, traditionally you want to start with tests that you can reliably run that doesn't require human intervention. And that's why you start with something like unit tests. And without getting into a whole big thing with that, where possible, I write code that doesn't require even Unity. I've said before, you just open a C# project, write some code, verify that if put money in wallet, int value in wallet goes up or down. That way you can verify all that stuff. And so by the time you start like dragging stuff across in your inspector, it doesn't matter. You've already tested the core logic works. And as you step up your game down through that, you'll cut out more and more of them. Some of them will get through, but if they do get through, what you want to do is remove friction from giving you bug reports. As a general rule, people won't do it if it takes too much work. It's the same classic, like, give us feedback. No one's going to give you feedback if it's like, go to our website, click on the thing, log in an email. What you want is a nice shiny button that says, give me feedback. And if you do that, what you can do as a designer, which is really cool, is you can take a screenshot of the screen. You can grab a dump of the current state of the variables in the application. You can have them type in a message. Don't ask for their email address as a mandatory thing. You can ask for the email address if you say, would you like to answer questions on it? Don't make it mandatory, or otherwise people will go, I don't want to give it my email address, and they won't give you the feedback. Obviously different for internal QA versus having random testers. But then send that stuff to somewhere, and you can then check all of your values, which is extra useful because personally, I despise reading the log file. The log file is a giant mess of complicated crap, when realistically most use cases boil down to, oh, your health was at minus 500. That's the only bit of information I need. And so having a dump of the variables directly related to what happened and the last 5 log messages or errors that tracked or something is usually enough to find your problem. So that's a solution if you're looking for quick ways to get feedback tools. You can write your own, or they exist on the asset store. There are free ones as well. People have just written scripts. Because at the end of the day, it's like 9 lines of code. It's just like, take snippet of screenshot, grab memory of whatever's there, zip file, send it to somewhere. And there's lots of ways to do it shorter or easier or whatever. If you want to go one step higher, we talk about different tooling you can use to automate some of this process and do different things. Odin Inspector or Odin Validator, to be specific, their more powerful kind of enterprise tool, automates some of this by allowing you to create rules at editor time that say all waypoints must touch the ground, or all doors must have an interact box collider on it or something. And you write rules that you can then validate your scene. And so even if someone makes a mistake, you can validate it and add buttons in the inspector to fix it. It's really cool, really powerful. Personally, I don't use it because I had a few issues where if the validator has bugs, it causes the whole editor to stop working. So I'll give it a bit more time to mature. But I trust those guys. They know what they're doing. It's going to be a valuable tool in future. And then finally, one step past that is you get into integration testing. And that's where, aside from all the stuff that we talked about, if the code works perfectly, that still doesn't guarantee it works perfectly. So you might have a classic example of this from a UI perspective is all of the code may run perfectly fine, but someone redesigns the UI and they hook up the wrong button to the wrong action. So the delete button is now the add button or vice versa. That would be really hard to debug because all of the code works absolutely perfectly. So what you do need to do is emulate someone using the application. And the way you do that is you simulate someone playing the game. Now you can do it manually by literally having someone run through multiple iterations, but other shortcuts include you can run, Unity have their own runtime tests where you can basically set up code that will spawn a game object, move it 10 units, do a thing and whatever. And that's a close approximation to
or load a menu and click a button. You could have it
load a menu and click a button. Yeah, it's still not the same. The next step past that is sort of an accurate representation of someone using the application. And there's a tool for that called GameDriver. GameDriver is a version of something called Selenium, which is, it's not really, it's like their own Unity approaching Selenium, but Selenium has been a standard in web development for a long time, where it allows you to have web applications and click through and interact with it. So long story short, what a tool like Selenium or WebDriver do is they screenshot the application and they move the mouse to the right places and then interact with the screen, and then you take the output and see what it does. So that simulates someone literally moving the mouse, clicking a thing, typing something, pressing button. So that's the general
takeaway. This one will
takeaway.
literally do exactly. It'll play through, run your character around, and you can record running your character around and have it replay that exact same set of inputs and everything.
You can inspect the memory, make sure that like if you added money to your wallet, the money actually appears in memory at the right location. There's a lot of really fun stuff this does, but it is an enterprise tool for enterprise scale testing. It's not going to be cheap, but the team over there is great. They know what they're doing, and it's a powerful tool. So
yeah, I don't
to answer
think
your question,
it's
it's the whole
expensive if you're small, and it's free if you're on a small end. Like, but it's like any enterprise thing that scales up if you're huge. But yeah, I think they have a pretty low priced tier for indies and stuff in here. I've lost track of their actual pricing though. Very cool tool though.
So yeah, either way, the point is there is a plethora of options ranging from how you solve it. But the truth is a lot of the higher end ones only matter if you're like dealing with large scale applications with thousands of users and you're trying to make sure it works properly. The truth is for 99.9% of devs, write tests at the code level, make sure it kind of works, have someone on your team that isn't high value for development, usually someone who's working in a more artsy side of stuff when they're not busy, because oftentimes there's cycles, right? Like coding is done constantly for debugging, fixing, hot fixing, debugging, fixing, hot fixing, but art is cyclical. It's like feature development, build a thing, feature development, build a thing. And so if you don't have a big team, you can find either someone who's doing design work to fill in the gaps and just cycle it. Have like game jam style parties where they just run through the app multiple times, iterate stuff, find bugs, post it on a shared board, generate the bugs that way. That'll do you for most people, I think.
All right, well, I think Andrew's got to go in a second, so I'm going to give him a real quick chance to share the exciting news of the cool new stuff that he just released.
We've released 3 cool new things. They're low poly characters. They all came in at once, and so they all got released at once, and they're all part of the low poly Monster Bundle 2, which is currently on sale for the next whatever many days. So check that out. They're all the 3 new characters: the Treant low poly, the Weeper low poly, and the Troll low poly are now all part of that. So it's a good low poly package if you're looking for monsters to fill your Cinti Studios environments. And they have the same animations as the high poly ones. And so the Treant has all the new animations. The Treant has a ton of animations, and so it's got all that. already built into it. So,
Oh,
fun.
side note, by the way, Andrew, I
Yeah.
saw one of the videos on that, and I think it was like, was it an orc or something? And you had like pre-saved fat levels for ranges and stuff. Very cool. I was like, that's a legitimately really cool feature. I didn't see you develop that, so I was like, ooh,
Oh
that's
yeah,
neat.
that uses
like
the
that.
blend shape preset manager. That's been around for a while, but it allows you to basically make blend shapes that, you know, we got non-animated blend shapes that do the mesh morphing, and the preset manager, you can load in the shapes and set them to explicit values or randomized values. So for the demo scenes, there's always a reset, which just puts everything explicitly at 0, and a random that just says randomize everything. But for the treant, I think it was, maybe it was the troll, one of the two.
You randomize both the sword and then the body separately, and I was like, that's cool. That gives you a lot of flexibility in what you're doing.
Oh yeah, that was for the I put up a new tutorial on so in infinitypvr.com there's a tutorial section, and somebody had requested, there's a link for it, like somebody had requested an update to the mesh morphing and blend shapes because the last tutorial was not using the preset manager, and so I made that tutorial. So that's what you're thinking of. Yeah. So I do try to make tutorials, but I update my stuff so often I can't keep up with the tutorials because I make an update and I'm like, a tutorial's a little out of date. So
I was noticing that myself, trying to update stuff on your stuff. Like, wait a minute, this doesn't work right now. This has changed again.
Yeah,
it seems like it's constantly getting a lot of development.
Yeah, that's the downside. The good side is that things always keep getting better, which is a good thing. And as I learn more, I'm going to update things and make them better. I'm going to do my best to not let things linger too long. Although the blend shapes itself, the blend shapes script, it's on its second big version now, and it's going to need a third big version at some point. The second version didn't clean up a lot of the underlying logic, which it works perfectly fine. It's just not super obvious what it's doing. And I think I need to spend some time remembering what it's doing, and then redoing it in a more easy, human readable fashion, and maybe make it. It's already efficient enough. I think maybe it can be made a little bit more efficient, but yeah.
Nice. So it definitely is a cool setup and some cool characters. By the way, I gotta talk to you later. I've been meaning to talk to you about some code stuff, so I'll have to hop onto a call. I had some ideas I wanted to run by you. So we'll have to chat sometime when you're not busy. But yeah, I guess we'll let you go and let everybody grab that low poly bundle, and then maybe give away one more thing and start to wrap stuff up in a few minutes.
Good luck to everybody and have a happy new year. See ya.
Thanks for
Happy
joining
New
us,
Year,
Andrew.
Andrew.
All right, so let me switch this up. Why is it not switching that's weird. It's switching between tabs now. Okay, I must have shared a window instead of a tab. So before we go on, I wanted to quickly mention the GameDev Guild conference because I've got two things that I wanted people to submit. So GameDev Guild is coming up. If you didn't come last year, it was a online event, game development conference, trying to be focused almost 100% on just actionable talks, things that you can actually use like that day or the next day in your projects. This year we're doing a 5-day event, but I'm looking for more ideas for topics and also speakers. I've got a big list of topic ideas that I think are interesting, and I've sent out a survey earlier for people to go fill in what they think is interesting. I'll drop the link in chat again. There's the long version of the link. So please, if you have some thoughts, if there's something that you're interested in seeing, just go put that in there. Just drop it in there and share with everybody. You can see some of the responses. We've got 32 so far. I thought level design was an interesting first one to come in. And then there were a couple people asking about how to use AI, system design, getting assets to work, multiplayer stuff, mobile, more multiplayer environments. You can see there's just a big list of cool ideas, and I want to try to pick the best ones and the ones that are people are submitting the most, and make sure that we're covering those. And also, for anybody who's watching and interested in speaking at a conference, if you've never done it before, it's okay. It's not nearly as stressful and overwhelming as it sounds. It's a pretty simple process. If you're interested, you have something that you'd like to share, or you've done a talk already or you just want to practice and work on a talk too, please just email me, jason@game.courses, and I'll get you the info and we'll start that discussion and see. I think, yeah, we'll dive. I'll give you all the details, but looking for people who would like to do a talk. 20, 25 minutes.
I feel bad that last time I wasn't around for the talk. So this time I'll promise you I'll get something ready for a talk this time around. And
I'm
on that
really
note-
hoping it's a design related one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I might do something on level design type stuff because you were mentioning that earlier. One thing I would say though, just for anybody else, if you are worried or want to do a talk, feel free to hit Jason up and he'll get through to me or join my Discord. And if you do want to do a talk, I'll happily talk you through some of the stuff to do with setting up your camera or your lighting, or if you don't want to do that, to just use the screen capture and the tools I use. I had a number of people ask me for help during that when they gave their talks, and so I enjoy that stuff. I'm probably going to write some kind of help document that's like, here's how to give a basic presentation on stuff. So if it's not your area, we'll help you out with that too. I mean, everybody has some interesting thing they can talk about, so let us know and we'll help ease the gap, you know.
Nice. Yeah. I feel like it's one of those things that's scary the first time you do it, especially. But after that, it becomes much easier. Like, oh, that wasn't too bad at all. Like, I've never known anybody who did it and was like, oh, that was terrible. I never want to do it again. So,
Yeah, it's the exact opposite. I got both you help for both setting up my camera, setting up the microphone, getting more comfortable talking to people, and eventually going on the show and the meeting. And I am having great blast of fun. So
yeah, and it just
Yeah.
gets easier each time, right? I feel like every time it gets easier and more fun. So, yeah, if you're interested in it, just go to gamedevguild.com or email me at jason@game.courses, and I will that's if you want to actually talk about doing a talk, that's where you go. Just email me. And then if you have an idea, please just submit them in the form. It's shared right there. All right. I'll stop screen sharing. We'll do the
And
giveaway
then
of the writer license in a minute.
we will
Go
rip
ahead.
you to pieces with questions afterwards. So
The questions are all nice and you
joking.
don't have to
Yeah.
answer them. They get submitted, we look at them, and as long as you have an answer for it, we pop it up and you can answer it. If you don't, then we can skip it and move on to the next one. Really.
everything
There'll
at your
be
own
more than
comfort.
So did you guys have maybe one last topic you're interested in you want to hit?
Before we move to the next topic, I wanted to just bring up something a bit more basic regarding QAing and reproducing bugs. We didn't actually go over the list of tools that Unity gives you. So Unity lets you attach a debugger and run through your code. And that lets you catch whenever something bad happens and see how it propagates to the situation getting worse, what the user eventually sees. Usually when you see a bug that happens, you can discern the point at which it comes from, and you can see the conditions that could create it happening. So you can try and catch it through that. If you do get to debug, you can attach your code editor to Unity and add a breakpoint. And then once that line of code hits, you can see what value is with that condition that would end up making the bug happen. And you can try and go back and see where it was called from with the bad situation. You can also pause in the actual
at
play mode
runtime
and
as
see-
well.
Yeah.
Not just the editor, at runtime as well. You can hook up to your runtime builds. Just want to
Yeah, you can actually make debug builds that also have a console log, even though you're not in an editor. And you can also, in the editor, pause and go step by step and seeing just before something bad happens, find the exact point, see everything around it, remember that. But even better, you can see things that you can't see in the usual gameplay state because the editor has debug view. You can actually open up the render view and see each step of the rendering, or if you need to, you can see the wireframes and see if there's an object hiding somewhere. It's rarer to have things that are more spatial-based bugging out, but it is useful to have, especially when you have clipping objects or something that is suddenly
colliders too. That was one. Honestly, I didn't know this for like a year. There is like a view for collider. Yeah, the collision debug. Like how like you can just see all of the collision shapes. Like, oh my god, the amount of times I was trying to figure that out. It's like so
Unity
easy.
didn't advertise it at all. They really didn't advertise it at all, and then loads of people just came along it, and they're like, "Hang on, you've got a physics debugger? Oh yeah. It's a massive one. It's like an obfuscation view as well. Nobody knew that was there. Oh, it's there. You can see what's obfuscated out and what's not there, what's disappearing behind you, and how to clear it all out. Yeah.
Sorry, I
On
had
top
to
of,
step away because you reminded me that I need to add debugging to my beginner course. I always forget that people don't know that they can attach, step through stuff, and debug, and that's like one of those skills. It took me, I didn't know about that until I'd been coding professionally for like a year and a half, 2 years, and somebody showed me, I was like, what the fuck? Why didn't nobody tell me I could do this? It's magic.
Just this is more of a meme thing, but I just want to bring it up because it was mentioned. A few people commented that I was talking very fast earlier. Yes, I do. I do that a lot. And one of the proposed points was that it's because I watch videos at three speed. I don't. I watch videos at 3.5 speed. Thank you very much. But that's beside the point. My actual workflow, just because it was funny because we mentioned ChatGPT earlier. A particularly fun note for people who are interested. I finally found a workflow for my note taking with videos that is really cool, and I just want to brag about it because I think it's something that everyone should give a try to if you're like me and consume a lot of videos. What I would do is, if you want to take snippets of notes from a video, do you have to watch the video and write all the notes down? Well, what I do is I'm using a new tool brought out by Readwise. It's called Readwise Reader. And so I press a button, it migrates the video over to Readwise Reader, it transcribes the whole video for me. As the video plays, it's moving the cursor along with the words, and then I can use keyboard shortcuts while watching the video to highlight sentences and words throughout the video as I like it. And then, when I'm done, I open up my Obsidian Vault, and it automatically syncs the video, the timestamps, and all of the sections that I've selected from that video. And then one extra layer on top of that, which is insane, is it's got native ChatGPT support. So I can actually open a video, I can say, ask this video a question, and I can ask a question contextually related to the video, where I could say something like, summarize this video for me, or list the 5 topics they talked about in this video, or where would I find the products that they recommended in the video, and it'll just write me the summary and it adds to my notes. So not only do I watch stuff at 3.5x speed, I barely even watch them anymore because AI tells me what's in the video. So there you go.
Oh, hang on. You've got to watch my videos. I need the view.
Don't worry, I still watch yours. You can tell by the snarky comments at the bottom of them.
Yeah, well,
This is the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's a legitimate like power reading tool. I put all of my stuff over there. I have a dark mode, of course, rather than this horrible light mode. And then the whole thing is runnable through keyboard shortcuts. So like while reading a document, it little things too that I can't even express that's so valuable. Like every article that I send over here, it strips the ads, keeps only the images and the text, which makes them cleaner, easier to read, changes the font to a universal font, which is easier to read, and then it gives me a counter at the top based on word count to estimate how long it'll take me to read that article. So if I'm trying to figure out, I've got 20 minutes, I can find an article that's 5 or 10 minutes to read. So there's like, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do when trying to min-max content consumption.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll try this thing out once we're done with this stream. I have to give that a try. Well, I wanted to give away our JetBrains Writer license real quick. So anybody who hasn't used it before, definitely go try out Writer, try out JetBrains tools. Great for writing code. Oh, Yora, you asked about the collision viewer in chat. I just saw that.
Yeah, I saw somebody asking about the collision viewer. It's actually under analysis and physics debugger. Is it the official button name?
Yeah,
fantastic
so
to have.
There. It's window analysis, and then you say physics debugger.
Debugger, yeah.
Just a side note too, we talked about that. There's loads of these, as we were saying earlier. One of them as well, really small one I really like, is the bottom right corner. If you click that little circle, that's the process window. And if you dock the process window, all of those weird background things where it's doing refreshes, repaints, recompiles, any of that stuff, you don't just get it like freezing and waiting. It'll tell you each step and how many sub-steps. And if you've got a good tool developer, like our good friend here, Warped Imagination, I'm assuming your tools support those kinds of things. And so there'll be like actual per tools, the different pop-ups of like how long it's taking to process your own asynchronous tasks. So like I actually keep that docked almost all the time so I can see the editor's background running tasks.
I need to pop that up. I've noticed on one of the latest versions, my editor is constantly doing something, and I've been wondering what the hell it is. So I need to dock that and see if I can track it. I was actually going to attach the profiler to figure out what was going on because it was taking like 20 seconds to press play in this one project that it shouldn't. So there's definitely something wrong. I just got to figure out what's going on there. So this is JetBrains Writer. It's their code editor. It's the one that I use, and I think all three of you guys use it, right? Have you guys switched to anything else?
I'm still on Rider, and I'm happy to stay.
I'm still Visual Studio.
Oh, okay.
Oh, disgusting.
Everybody-
Disgusting.
I know, horrible.
Everyone but disgusting Dave is using.
And you know what? I would have been okay, except I very recently had somebody ask me for help with a problem, which was they wanted to do autocompletes, you know, your code snippet things automatically, and they were trying to do it in Visual Studio, and you have to use this horribly archaic XML formatting structure to do it. And then you go over to Writer, and there's this beautiful live templating system with like really nice automatic, like just that alone, the amount of stuff I can automate, it's just take the leap, man, take the leap.
Yeah. So the winner will go to whoever, I guess, one of the people that gets this next question right. So I'll hit the button, and then you just got to vote whatever the letter is of the correct answer. So, the first monster/character Infinity PBR put out on the asset store was, and then you've got 5 choices. I was actually surprised by this one.
Have all these questions been donated by Andrew?
You know, Andrew did
All
put
asset
in
store.
a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Out of all of them, I'd say he was probably like 20%, 25%.
I was waiting for one of the questions to be like, what is the 6th file in this asset pack? Link here. Go download it and find out.
yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
You know, I actually wish he was here right now, because this is actually difficult to find in the asset store. Specifically, you can't actually sort by a person's newest assets, if I recall correctly.
Okay. The answer is A.
You wouldn't assume a person has multiple pages worth of assets, so they didn't include an option to sort them out.
I'll give
trying
everybody
to
a
find
couple
that
more
on the asset store is just awkward.
I paused so everybody can have an extra couple seconds.
You also can't search by creator, so the search that has the sorting feature doesn't actually tell you that.
All right, so it looks like Mr. Calderon 3D wins, so congratulations.
Hang on. I'm still going through it trying to find out what it is.
Oh, you're too slow. So send me an
No, it's
email,
not.
please, jason@game.courses, and I will send you over your writer code. And to our earlier winner, please make sure that you email me too for that Odin code. All right. Stop screen sharing. Say congrats. I need to make that winning thing much prettier, though. The giveaway thing, like I like the quiz part, but I really hate the ugly UI. So I've got to fix that up sometime soon.
Get some particles from the asset store sale and then just slap them in.
That's not like you to skimp on the UI look.
It is definitely like me to skip on the UI. Oh yeah, I'm terrible at making things look pretty. I just make them look ugly and then send them to like Salim and go, "Hey, can you make this look pretty?" Now it works. Now that it's functional, make it not suck. Right? That's kind of my thing. Or send it to Dave. Dave can make it look pretty too.
I'm busy.
He's
Yeah,
always
but-
making a top 3 video of the best tutorials that I've ever seen on YouTube. Yeah.
Not that I've there was the top 3 from my own tutorials. I did actually put it up and I actually changed some of the name on it because like the best tutorials on Unity. I was like, oh, hang on, that's
No,
fine.
you
I'm not
just
gonna lie.
Posted
Like
way too often.
I'm being genuine when I say your channel is my favorite Unity tutorial channel. I'm completely not kidding. And this is like, I purely mean it.
I'm
because
not paying you again. I know I've paid you for the last 5 times you said this, but I'm not paying you again. You charge too much.
But yeah, no, in all seriousness, like there's a lot of people in the chat will probably say the same thing. There's a lot of beginner content, and then there's intermediate stuff. And the question is, what do you cover, and who covers it, and what types? And Jason Weimann covers the bridging gap content. I cover the architectural stuff that's kind of more abstract. And you're one of the few people who covers the tooling, editing, the stuff that actually gets jobs done. And nobody else is doing that kind of content. And it's delivered efficiently and easy to read and understand. So legitimately, as even from my level, I find your content the most valuable because it often changes my own workflow. Like no other channel does that, or I watch content and there's like genuinely a 50% chance I'll look at something and go, I have to go change my code now to add some new feature. So
I am the producer's worst nightmare because people watch it and they're like, I'm going to have to go and do this instead of doing my job. Yeah. Plus, I speak so slowly that everybody can watch me at 3 times the speed as well. So
Yeah.
don't ever look at the time period.
Here's
You
a-
can just 2x me and watch me at 2 times because it works.
the truth is, I'm not even kidding, I watch my own videos at 2 speed because I can't watch myself at 3.5. I know. I
Oh
speak
no,
too
I
fast.
can't.
Yeah.
I can't watch myself at 1. Like it makes me cringe when I'm watching my videos back, and I'm like, do I really sound like that? It's not how I sound in my head. Am I that? Why did I say 5 times? Why did I say 14 times? I don't edit any of that out because I really don't care.
No, eventually you just get tired of hearing it and you stop doing it.
Oh,
Or you go to Toastmasters and they tell you that you said it 42 times in that speech, and you go, okay.
It's like when I make some of those tutorials like 40 minutes long, and I'm like, oh, I gotta watch this back. No,
No,
like,
those ones I don't.
There are
watch
a couple
back
of
to. I
videos on my
scrub
channel
through.
that I've never watched back because I'm like, no, if there's a problem in it, somebody will tell me. It'll be done.
I almost never watch my own videos. I watch like the parts as I'm editing them, and that's about it. Because I get the same way. Even after doing it for a long time, like I feel a little bit weird. It doesn't bother me so much, but I also just feel like it's boring as hell, like watching myself talk. And I get the same thing like Jason. Like I like watching your videos, Dave, because it's usually something that I don't already know. And most other YouTubers, like they're showing something, it's something cool, but it's something I already know. Right? Like it's usually something I know unless it's something new. I like to see like the new things that are coming out, and then like some of your more advanced stuff and the weird tooling shit too. Yeah, you do
it's
things
not
that
even
I don't think about a lot.
It's not even the super complicated stuff. Like I can honestly say I have used the menu items for like 2 years in Unity, and I'd never checked the documentation to know there was a validation function to like gray them out under certain contexts. And I'm like, that would have been so many things would have been better for my tools for developers if I'd done that. Yeah.
Loads of people ask how I come across them, and some of the times it's a case of I've built Unity, I've built an editor to create games for AAA way back in the day, and I built a tool that did something, and then I'm like, oh, they've got to have this, and then I look it up, and it's some obscure document they've never written about how to do this particular thing, and I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll pop that in. Eventually, I might run out of the obscure things Unity. Well, actually, I won't because they're terrible at promoting
They'll
their
do
own
more.
stuff. Yeah. The funny one is the one for me was somebody said, "Well, can we just have a scene, like a load scene button in your scene view where you could just go, right, I want to go to that scene." So I just created the overlay for it, and now everybody's telling me they're using it. Like, great.
I'm using it.
Yeah, somebody mentioned doing it. Like I was building an overlay and they said, can you do one that just has it for scenes so I can switch scenes? And I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's a really good. And I use it constantly now. It wasn't my own idea. It was somebody mentioning it. And then I created it.
Although my little addition for me is I made a version that does builds as well. But a little trick for myself is I made one which does a build with the normal build layout. And I did another one which changes the current scene to be the front runner for build and then builds with that. So if I want to just build this scene to test something like right now versus the whole real cycle of the game, I found I use those two quite a lot.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one. I'll build that next. That'll be my next video. I'll do that as a video because why not? Yeah, something to do.
On my own end, it's usually when I try to make something easier to work with, and then I figure out Unity doesn't give me ways to make it easier. So I end up looking at through the worst ways possible, figuring out what class I'm looking at in the Unity editor, and then I'm seeing its code, and then I'm making a duplicate of it that has some things that are a bit different, or a wrapper for it that doesn't let me access everything Unity has because its editor windows are internal. So I spawn them in really roundabout ways. But it ends up being a lot of fun. For example, we talked about this before, David, but there is like the animator window that has the actual animator states, and each state has a clip, but you can't see the clip that you're assigning to the animator state. But if you're pressing a transition, you can see the transition from one clip to another clip. So I ended up figuring out, how does that preview window work? How can you give a preview window to an editor when you hover over an asset, just show a preview, and then how to make the animator state that already exists have a preview. Apparently, you can override the editors for Unity with your own editors, even if it's existing classes like beyond monobehavior. And then you can give it whatever code you want. And previews have a lot of code to them, which is really awesome.
I saw this comment pop up.
Real game developers.
I was just curious, is they making Half-Life 3 now?
for the last 20 billion years or something. They announced
I want
it
to find
and then
that.
just
Yeah,
I used to love trolling people because you know the way you have the call out in Discord that says what game you're playing. You can just make a shortcut and mess with the description on it, and it'll say whatever it is you wanted to say. And so I used to have one that would crop up, and it would say HL3 beta dash something something something, just to have people freak out. And that's it.
That's
Good fun.
good. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, you shouldn't have told me you could do that. That's so dangerous. I'm gonna so troll everybody now.
Uh-oh.
Somebody tells me they're building a new game, and then suddenly they see me playing the game that they're building. Oh.
That actually
yeah.
sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like, what did you do? You hacked us. Typical Dave. Hacking in and playing their games early, huh?
Yeah.
Honestly, though, if you do want to get feedback, it's really beneficial to give somebody a build so they can actually try it out. No commentary from you, and get their honest thoughts.
Oh yeah. You never talk to the person that's playing your game unless it's absolutely necessary, because you'll completely screw up the fact that they're playing their game, and to get good feedback.
When you keep telling them step by step what to do, what to look
Yeah.
at. Now open your inventory. Hit I.
Why aren't you pressing the A button? Because you never told me there was an A button to press or what to do with it. Yeah.
So they
I've
start
seen
telling
that.
you the whole story.
My favorite is
Behind
like,
that person is
there's a couple of
slapping them back in the
games.
head.
There's a couple of games I've watched YouTubers play. Is like sometimes I'll do that. I'll watch various YouTubers play the exact same game at the same like gameplay portion, just to see how they react as like a first time thing. And every so often there's some games where there's one bug, issue, or misunderstanding, and it's like visually failed by like 6 people in a row. The one that really stood out to me was in Trover Saves the Universe. They had one joke bit in it, and I watched 3 different YouTubers all make the same "I don't know what to do next" thing because the game didn't clarify it. I just love that. It's very fascinating to see how those things are not clear sometimes.
That's why you have to stand there next to your players and tell them how to play. I actually did that a couple of times doing VR stuff before I realized I was like, oh, this is a bad idea. I learned really, really quickly that it's easy to bias people and screw up your results by telling them exactly how to play and telling them all of the things that your game should be intuitively giving them and it kind of informing them on it instead of...
It's the users who are wrong.
Even just being in the room. Just being in the room while somebody's playing your game, because they won't want to hurt your feelings.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So if you're going to be in the room, be the biggest arsehole to them before they actually start playing, because then they'll want to break your game. Wonderful. That's what you want them to do.
Want to make you sad.
Hmm.
Well, all right, guys.
good
I
at
think
that.
it's probably about time to wrap this up. I'm going for a couple hours and had a lot of fun. You guys have any last second things you want to share or talk about?
Just because someone did say a comment, I don't know if they're joking or not, but someone said they'd like to see a Jason Story Discord. There is a Jason Story Discord. It's just a private one, so it requires a donation on my Ko-fi page. So you can go there or go to my website, jason.guide, and you can get access to the private Discord. There's a couple hundred of us there, and we talk about stuff like this all the time.
Yeah, that should be linked in the video description too. If it's not, I'll make sure that it is, but it should be in every one of the show episodes, and everybody should probably go join it. If you haven't already, you should hop in there, I think. And then, Yorai, you got something?
Yeah, so over the past few weeks, I've actually been working on a project for passion and to help some friends regarding making a player controller that has support for different gravity directions, gravity zones, swimming, climbing at any direction, like in Breath of the Wild or Genshin Impact, and generally just easy workflows to create new states for a character and giving them new moves. And I recently packed this project into a zip file and I distributed it on Jason Story's server. So if anybody wants to take a look at that and give some feedback, feel free.
Nice. That's on the Jason Stories Discord?
Yeah,
So just
it's on the
go to
showcase
this Ko-fi
channel.
page and sign up and check it out. That sounds awesome. I want to try that out. So it's a 3D character controller?
Yeah, I've used animations from Mixamo. I try to keep it as simple as possible for readers to go through. It has support for many features. I try to keep the code relatively clean. I prioritize the cleanliness over performance, but I made sure not to do any recklessly bad things to it.
Nice.
One thing that I think is really understated is how easy it is to support different gravity directions, where I see a lot of game developers just setting some y-axis value to 0 or setting the x and z to 0. It's really easy to use that with vector projection methods or using quaternions to rotate things, so you always have support for whatever rotation you want to run on.
Yeah, the mid-air upside down swimming was particularly cool. It's like I haven't seen many character controllers do that.
Yeah, I feel like with those things, a lot of it is the confusion on knowing what to do, like knowing which methods to do. I can't remember it offhand. I have to look it up every single time going through that. So that's super cool. I want to check it out. I'm going to try that out later today if I get a chance. It sounds really freaking cool.
Yeah. Feel free to code review it next show.
That'd be a cool one. We should just go over it and talk about it. That would be a lot of fun. Maybe we can do that next week.
Hashtag roast my code.
Dave, you got anything coming out? Looks like you made the best tutorials of 2022. You got to get rid of my. Just get rid of best. Just get rid of the word my. Put it back to best. You don't need a my.
Yeah, I've got to stop being nice and being
you got to be more clickbaity, not less.
Oh, I know. Everybody keeps saying, "Why aren't you on video?" Because I don't want to be on video. Yeah, put your face on there like that. Yeah, no.
Well, you might get too many subscribers then. People go, oh, it's too cute.
I'm definitely taking that screenshot and putting it on my next video. So there.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Copyright. Yeah, no, I've had a bit of time. I've not been contracting for a little bit now because clients. And I've just been working on the simulator. So there'll be some more videos coming out on the motion simulator for the Articulate, the big mech simulator thing. That'll be coming out next year at some point. And I've been basically burning videos out. So I've just been chucking videos out like 2 a week for the last month and a half or something, and burning through my list because I had so many requests. I was just like, oh, shit, I've got to get through these. So yeah, there's a ton, an absolute ton of videos I've put out, too many to mention. So yeah, they're all on there. And there's actually a tool that I'm going to be doing a video on coming probably in January. That's probably the most useful tool that I've ever created for Unity. And I'm not going to say what it is. You just have to subscribe if you want to see it.
See, he doesn't know how to play the game.
Yeah. There you go, clickbaity.
But seriously, unsubscribe and resubscribe. There we go.
There's a tool that I created probably 3 weeks ago, and I use it all the time. More than that scene switching tool, this thing is gold dust. So I think I'm going to screw up Jason Story's day when I actually do that.
Most definitely, yeah.
I mean, you drastically improve his day. It's just you're ruining the moment that he's trying to have doing something else because now he has to switch priorities.
Oh, too many priorities. I've got so many priorities.
Before we go, Story, somebody asked in chat, the Discord
it's one time. It's whatever the minimum is, one time. It's, to be brutally honest, it's just a gate to make sure I don't get bots, to be fair. So it's
a bot blocker. Totally
pretty much, yeah.
I think the minimum is like $5 or something. It was low. So yeah, definitely go sign up and join that, hop in that chat. I love watching that chat. I still don't talk in there often. I just watch it, but I like watching your guys' discussions. I just sit there and lurk like a creeper, like watching you guys talk back and forth and discuss complex problems. Oh, especially when I'm laying in bed with babies around me. Like,
it's also cool. People have started doing sort of pair programming and review stuff in the chat channel, which I really appreciate. I like seeing more people like actively work and be able to jump in and chat about topics and stuff, which is cool.
Yeah, there's somebody working on a time management tool. I was working on debugging physics issues, and I used the physics debugger to show my character clipping into the ceiling when trying to climb and detaching from the climbing wall. There's a lot.
I was
going on
structuring
there.
ideas for a course I'm currently writing, so I got some insight from the community on what I should include. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Cool. All right, guys. I think we'll wrap it here and come back next week, and then maybe we can talk about this math thing too. I think in theory you only need to be good at math to make games.
Well, I'm not good at math, so help me.
You don't need to do that. Terraria is perfectly fine. You don't need to know math to make good games. Terraria is doing perfectly fine. We're just making sure the numbers feel fun.
You just need to know how to make math, to do math to make good games. the only difference.
What you
I'm
lost?
You only need to know a portion of what is considered math.
Oh, I just keep getting reminded of the FTX Alameda research lady who said that she just uses very basic math to bankrupt the company.
Yeah, that worked out so well for them.
I just love that
Topic
they were
of
using
discussion.
the same accounting software that I use for, which is great for millions of dollars. Fantastic.
Oh man, yeah. All right, well, with that said, we'll say goodbye. See everybody next week. Please hit like, subscribe, share, drop a comment down below, and let us know if you have any questions or thoughts for the next episode. And we'll see you next week.